Hi, it's Angela Gritters. Well, we're going to make a pie that's called apple slab pie. It's not going to be in a pie pan. We're going to be putting it in my jelly roll pan. It is such a delicious pie. You cut it in squares. It's great for potlucks. Now, you can make them this big. You can make them different sizes. We're going with the basic 9 by 13. So I've already got everything ready that I need. All my spices, I'll tell you the dimensions in just a few seconds. But meanwhile, because they're starting to turn, I'm going to go ahead and start chopping up my apples. We're going to be doing 6½ cups, and I've already peeled them. So now I'm going to start chopping. And I've got some lemon juice to start sprinkling over them as I dice them. You could also use sliced, but since you're cutting this, the diced holds up better because you're cutting it into squares to serve it. So I'm going to start cutting. Alright, so I've already got some apple cut up. I'm going to go ahead and start putting a little bit of lemon juice on them. You just don't want dark apples. It's not pretty. I'm trying to move kind of quick to keep my apples pretty. Now, if you're just making this for your own family, if the apples turn, it's no big deal. But I'm giving this away. My husband is a former diabetic, and I'm borderline. So a lot of these desserts you see me cooking leave the house. We can't have them around. I just love to cook. And by the way, this is 2 tablespoons of lemon. Well, got my apples chopped up. Finished with my lemon juice. Use any kind of apple that you've got, but be sure and peel the apples. So now we're going to mix up our sugars and some flour and different things. Let's see, I've got a cup of granulated sugar, but I like to mix it with brown. So I'm using half and half, half granulated and half brown sugar. Use whatever you have on hand, but a lot of people like to mix them up. Some recipes call for brown only, but I really like to use both. Alright, so we've got our sugar, and then I've got some nutmeg and cinnamon. I have a whole teaspoon of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of nutmeg. And some flour. Got 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. And then we're going to bake it. Then after we bake it, we're going to make a real quick confectioner's sugar glaze. It's just a little bit of confectioner's sugar, a tiny bit of milk, and some vanilla. And we'll just drizzle it on. Alright, so let's try to get this butter in here. 1 tablespoon. Just use a fork or your pastry cutter. And I just didn't feel like getting my pastry cutter out. I'm just kind of crumbling up this butter. Now, there's a couple different ways to make a slab pie. Some recipes call for 2 pie crust on the bottom, and then they do a crumb topping. Others call for 1 pie crust and then a pie crust on top. And that's what we're going to do with this one. But a streusel topping is really good with it. Alright, so now that we've got this, we're going to add our apples to it. And I'm going to make sure and get my lemon juice out. And it's just as easy as pie. You just gently come up and down, and we're going to get every piece of apple covered with a little bit of our sugar mixture. My favorite slab is a peach slab, and sometimes I do peach with blueberry combined. Oh, is that good, or is that good? So you do peel this, like I said. Some apple recipes, it's okay not to peel, but this one, it's better peeled. All right, so we've got our apples all mixed up. And we're going to roll out our pie pan. We're going to roll out our pie crust. Obviously, we're not using a pie pan. So I've got Pillsbury pie crust, a box of 2. Now, some slab recipes call for 9 cups of apple. This recipe only calls for 6. So we're only going to use 1 crust on the bottom. If we were using more, I would go ahead and use 2 crusts. And we're going to unroll it. And I'm going to roll it into a rectangle. That's the plan. Sometimes a pie crust can get kind of soggy, and you might cook it first, but this one you don't. It cooks with the apples. And I'm just going to roll it out and keep trying to make it bigger. If you don't have a rolling pin, get a glass. And actually, the glass is doing a little bit better than the rolling pin. It was sticking to the rolling pin. You would not believe how good these apples taste. They're delicious. Let's get the goo. The goo is so good, we can't leave the goo. And I did not get my dough all the way to the edges. I got it as close as I could. It doesn't matter because I'm just going to put the other one on top to the exact size. If you can get it spread all the way to the edges, that's great, but I just can't. I've got bad hands, and I just couldn't do it. But it is easy to do if your hands work good. And all these apples are going to shrink up real small. But I'm going ahead and I'm coming all the way to the edges almost. I'm leaving a little bit of room because we're going to pinch this other piece of dough on top. Now, if you like to make homemade pastry, it's hard to beat. But I'm just using the refrigerated kind. But this is so good with a homemade pastry. Alright, so I'm going to start rolling it out again. Trying to get it as big as I possibly can. I wish they would make a rectangular pie crust. Now you could use phyllo if you wanted to. Or like any type of pastry, frozen. But a real slab pie is definitely a pie crust. Well, that took a while. My hands don't work. It took me forever to get it off of the Tupperware thing. Oh. So now I'm going to pinch all the way around, my top to my bottom. Now we're going to put a little wash over it. You can also use puff pastry. So I've got one room temperature beaten egg, and I'm adding 1 tablespoon of water. I think it was 1 tablespoon. Let me see. Yes. It's 1 tablespoon. So this is going to be our egg wash. And first we're going to cut some little holes to let the steam come out. You can do, if you're a real baker, you could do a lattice pastry on top. And if you did a homemade crust, you would make the extra large recipe size, and you would have been able to come all the way to the edges here. But you got to make sure you let the steam out. All right. We got our water in there. Beat with our egg wash. Okay. A lot of egg washes are just egg white. This one is, as you can see, the yolk and the egg white, both. Alright, we've got the egg wash on. And now I'm going to sprinkle a coarse sugar, a turbinado or a raw sugar. And you sprinkle that all over the egg wash. And then once we make the confectioner's sugar topping, it's going to be real pretty, I promise. And I think this is enough sugar, but let's make sure. Alright, going in at 375. My oven is preheated, and we're going to cook it 50 to 60 minutes. At about 40 minutes, I'm going to check it, because it might need to have aluminum foil put around the edges in case they're already starting to brown, because you don't want the edges to burn. Out of the oven and completely cooled. Smells delicious. Now, if I had had enough strength, I could have had enough dough to have rolled my pie crust all the way to the edges, but I just couldn't do it. So normally it's a full slab and it completely fills up this whole pan. And if you make it and you're strong, you won't have any problem. I used to be able to make it without a problem. It's just my strength is bad. So real quick, let's knock out our icing that we're going to put on here. We've got our milk. I believe that was 1/4 cup. Let me see here. No, it was 2 tablespoons of milk. Then we've got a teaspoon of vanilla. I always use Watkins. And then we're going to put in our confectioner's sugar. And we've got probably about 1 cup of powdered sugar. And I'm just going to add a little bit at a time. You never want to overwhelm it. You might not need it all. You know, you could get to a certain point and it's got enough sugar, it doesn't need any more thickness. And then we're just going to drizzle this on top. And like I said, this is so good with peaches, blueberries. You can use any kind of apple that you want. Any kind of fruit that you want. A friend of mine even was telling me about a pear pie she had recently. And I was thinking how good that would be in the slab. I'm just going to drizzle it. My drizzling's not going real good. Hold on. Mm-hmm. That sure is good. Well, it's moving right along. This is really good for breakfast with coffee. It's good anytime, but it's real good for breakfast. And this was just that one serving of confectioner's sugar. I didn't need to make a second one. Now, when it's completely cool, then that's when I'm going to cut it. The bottom of it's still not quite cool. And I promise you, this thing tastes better than it looks. I apologize for not being able to show you how it's supposed to look by really bringing my dough all the way to the edges. But it's not going to affect the delicious taste. I can promise you that. And as always, in the description, I'm going to put exactly how much sugar, how much cinnamon, how much nutmeg. And remember, if you didn't want to do the pie crust on top, you could do a crumb topping and only use one pie crust. But then you would not have iced it. So I'm going to lift this up carefully and put it on a pretty serving dish to take to my friend. Well, thanks so much for watching. And ignore the syrupy edges. Isn't that a beautiful apple slab pie? Bye-bye.